All right, MarkRgoersTV back with you to talk some South Carolina football. And to do that, we have to go to Will Gunter from the all-new early game down there in Columbia. Will, how you doing this fine morning?
Doing great. Ready for another college football Saturday. Big weekend in the SEC. And the game I know you want to talk about with me, the Carolina game, and not really on the national radar like some of the other ones, but here in Columbia, in terms of bowl eligibility, building something for the future, a big one for Will Muschamp's group. Opportunity to get one step closer to bowl eligibility with some other winnable games still on the docket.
You know, I've got to say, with the big three in the East, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida kind of distinguishing themselves, or we expect them to, you look at those other four teams in the SEC Eastern Division, and if you can kind of win that group, if you can kind of go 2-1 or 3-0 against the other three teams, talking Mizzou, Vandy, Kentucky, and South Carolina, I thought, and made this statement a number of times during the offseason, that's the key to bowl eligibility. Of course, in regards to also taking business out of conference and winning those games that you are expected to win, but winning that little foursome there, that's going to be key. You knocked off Vandy, and you got another one coming up with Kentucky. But we'll first talk about this oddity against East Carolina, because there's a lot of strange things that happened in this game. You talk about red zone defense at its best in a game in which you were kind of chewed up between the 20s. That was something else.
Yeah, Will Muschamp talked about that in the post game, that that was kind of the game plan going in, that they did not think that that East Carolina would be able to move the ball consistently in the red zone. Didn't think that they would be able to run the ball. So what you ended up kind of seeing was South Carolina willing to give up the short passes early on, willing to give up. Obviously, Zay Brown ends up with, I believe it's Brown. I know I keep messing up his name, with a Carolina commitment.
Zay Jones.
Jones, thank you. Yes, Zay Brown is committed. Zay Jones. If they can get any kind of productions from Zay Brown like they saw from Zay Jones, they'll be a heck of a recruit. But Zay Jones, they were willing to give that up. That was part of the game plan Saturday afternoon. I don't know if getting 3 turnovers, 2 interceptions, and a fumble, and plus a missed field goal in the red zone was part of the game plan, but that's how it played out. Certainly the play discrepancy, 92 to 53, is something that you cannot have happen very often and win football games. But you know what? We've joked about this on our radio show here this week. I don't know if you remember being in college or maybe late in high school, and the professor or teacher would say, do this math problem and show your work. Well, you might not have known how to show all your work, but you knew how to get the answer right. The correct answer is winning the football game. South Carolina doesn't need to show its work right now. It just needs to win football games. And that's exactly what happened on Saturday. It was ugly, but they got the correct answer, which is a win.
You brought back those days, and I love those teachers that didn't care, but then the other teachers were show your work, and otherwise you're not going to get credit for the answer. That brings back some bad memories. Brandon McElwain, he had the right answer in terms of the win. It didn't always look like he was able to show his work, but at times that he did, considering his first start, freshman, he made some overthrows, underthrows. He was off target at times, but threaded the needle a few times when he needed to, and you got a key fourth quarter field goal drive when he created some plays.
Well, you know what? They were 16. He was 16 of 28, but you know what, Mark? If you look at it, it could have been a lot better. He had 3 specific drops that kind of stalled drives, and these were easy passes. Just simply the pass was dropped. He had another one in particular where he scrambled to his right, and he's got to learn to put touch on the pass. That was something that was very clear Saturday afternoon. He still tends to throw. I saw Jacob Eason actually kind of have the same problem later that night against Missouri. Not to compare the two, but just that these young quarterbacks, they're trying to throw 90-mile-per-hour fastballs in there, and instead of taking sometimes a little bit off of the pass. I thought McElwain made big strides. He hasn't thrown an interception, at least for the Gamecocks now, as he threw 22 passes in the second half of the Mississippi State game. He threw 28 on Saturday. That's 50 passes, no interceptions. Those numbers, 16 to 28, could have been a little bit better. I do want to see him, I think, for the offense to continue to evolve, for the offense to be a little bit more progressive. Kurt Roper has to allow him to run the football a little bit more. He was 9 carries, 34 yards on Saturday, and 2 of those carries and about 20 of those yards came on the opening 2 drives when he scored touchdowns.
So David Williams, a back that has an interesting stat sheet himself in regards to playing time. We talked about him disappearing the week before against Mississippi State. Then he reemerges, leads the team in rushing, only gets 7 carries, but he's very productive, has a 25-yard run. So does Muschamp have anything to say in regards to his utilization of one David Williams?
Not much in terms of his utilization. Basically, he kind of Muschamp admitted, hey, David Williams has continued to do some of the things and progressed in some of the areas we initially asked him to progress in. And so he got his opportunity Saturday. He did, to a certain extent, look like the type of running back that he was expected to be. He ran with power. He was, as Will Muschamp stated in the offseason, a one-cut back. He put his foot in the ground and exploded through the hole. He had the big option carry there on the final drive of the game that they were able to put the game away with. So David Williams, if they can get that kind of production with him, all of a sudden you have a nice 1-2 punch at running back. But again, it doesn't matter if it's A.J. Turner or Will Gunter and Mark Rogers in the backfield. If the offensive line doesn't improve, if they don't start opening holes, becoming a little bit more physical, the run game's still going to be kind of non-existent. Currently, I believe, about 120th out of 128 teams and 14th in the SEC.
Yeah, I don't know how good we would do, Will, in the backfield. We might be comparable to that Kentucky secondary, possibly. They've been pretty awful this year. Man, looking at this football team, they lose Drew Barker. He's going to be out for an extended period of time. Stephen Johnson comes into the game and succeeds with 17 of 22, 3 touchdowns, 310 yards. But this Kentucky team has surprised me in a disappointing kind of way. I expected them to be much better, bowl eligible, possibly right on that fringe with some of those games like we talked about versus the South Carolinas and Vandy's being the key to getting them over the hump. But after a couple top 25 recruiting classes, and this team is looking pretty awful, but was able to survive a New Mexico State.
Well, the surprising thing with them is that their coach, their head coach, Mark Stoops, is a defensive-minded coach. And where are they having the most problems? On defense. You generally don't see that. They can put up points with anybody. Stephen Johnson's an interesting quarterback, was originally at Grambling, went to junior college, and now will get his first true start as a Kentucky Wildcat. And he's a mobile guy. I think he's actually a little bit more mobile than Nick Fitzgerald, who gave South Carolina a lot of problems and ran for 195 yards in the second game of the year. But obviously, when you talk about Kentucky right now, that's a program that I think is still reeling from the second half of that Southern Mississippi game. If they win that one, if they beat Southern Mississippi, and then they lose to Florida in the manner they did, and then beat New Mexico State, probably nobody really cares. They think that that's about right, 2-1. But blowing that game to Southern Mississippi, giving up the amount of points they did, was shocking. They didn't recover the next week against Florida, and even last week trailed going right before halftime and were tied 35-35 going into the break there against New Mexico State. So that's kind of been the surprise, is that their defensive-minded coach, Mark Stoops, they're having problems on defense. And we played a clip today, Mark Stoops yesterday, going off on his defense, saying that they don't have the right mindset and the right mentality. Well, it's year 4 there in Lexington. You know what? If anything else, you should have the right mindset and mentality ingrained in your team. You might be lacking talent, but you should have that talent and that mindset, or you should have that mindset and mentality. It's going to be an interesting game Saturday because you kind of have the movable object, which is the Kentucky defense, against the immovable force, which is the South Carolina offense right now. We had a guy on today who said something has to give. I always love it when people say that. Yeah, something has to give. What if nothing gives? What if both sides are equally bad?
Yeah, because you were able to put a spin on the old cliche there that's tough to do, because it's usually when we're talking about just great defense and exciting offense that can't be stopped and what's going to happen in this game. But I guess if guys are dropping passes and guys aren't making blocks, I guess the defense would be able to stop them. On the other hand, if they're not tackling anyone, yeah, your guess is as good as mine when these two get together from that standpoint. That Kentucky defense, if any bright spot can come from this game, the 35 in the first half given up and then only 7 in the third quarter, and they shut out the Aggies in the fourth quarter to finally pull away in what could have been an embarrassing loss for the program. What's the formula this week in going to Lexington?
Well, I think it's improvement. Again, it goes back to what you just said regarding South Carolina's offense versus Kentucky's defense. The yardage is there to be had versus Kentucky's defense. But if you're dropping passes, if you're committing holding penalties, if you're jumping off sides, then it doesn't matter how bad the opposition's defense is, you're shooting yourself in the foot. South Carolina last week had opportunities to move the football. They would have a positive yards play of 6, 7, 8 yards on first down and follow that up with a penalty, a dropped pass, or a breakdown on the offensive line that allowed a defender to get into the backfield. And it would go from 2nd and 3 to 3rd and 8 or 3rd and 9. And that's not where Brandon McElwain excels. So number one is just cutting down on the mistakes South Carolina is making themselves, dropping passes, committing penalties. Number two, you got to have a better game plan. I'm fascinated to see, after what we saw in Starkville against Mississippi State, Nick Fitzgerald going for 195 yards. I am fascinated to see what the game plan is for Steven Johnson on Saturday, a guy who's a little bit more mobile. We still want to see if he can beat you with his arm. I'm well aware of his stats from last Saturday, but that was New Mexico State. We ran a poll on our radio show this week, Mark, and we said through the first quarter of the season, how would you rate South Carolina's defense? The 4 options were much improved, slightly improved, I want to see more, or is John Hoke still in Columbia? The vast majority, 58%, voted slightly improved. So there is a feeling that this defense, from what they've seen the last 2 years, is slightly improved. They're going to have to slow down Kentucky to some extent because Kentucky's still putting up points. Boone Williams is a great running back for them. Steven Johnson's a little bit of a new commodity. They're going to have to be able to slow down that Kentucky offense, and that comes with having a solid game plan from Will Muschamp and Travaris Robinson.
Okay, if they face the big 3 in the East, and Florida's going to struggle on offense, we expect, but still a quality team that's got talent on offense, and then, of course, the finale against Clemson. Okay, we're not expecting miracles, but if they're able to hold those offenses, if they get some semblance of help from their offense, hold those offenses in the 30-point range and don't get blown out by those offenses, that's going to give me a better barometer. It's kind of difficult for me to go with anything right now, and I'm going to see those games played out, as I haven't seen a whole lot of South Carolina, although I did watch the Vandy game gun to gun. It'll be interesting to see what we have. So we all know that Will Muschamp's building a program. This team has not arrived. They're not ready. The program's not ready. But if you're able to win games against the teams that you're supposed to beat on the way to building the program, man, that's the perfect formula.
No, you're exactly right. And that's why this week is so big. If South Carolina wins this, they finish September 3-1. Texas A&M next week, Georgia the week after. You do have UMass and Western Carolina. You win this week, you feel like you should beat UMass and Western Carolina. That's 5 wins right there. Can you steal one somewhere along the line? I think the 2 worst matchups on the remainder of the schedule are Texas A&M and Clemson. Those are bad matchups. Texas A&M's in Columbia, Clemson's in Death Valley. Maybe with Florida, if they're still having problems late in the season, South Carolina's improved enough. I don't like that one, but Tennessee at home. We don't know what Georgia is. Georgia looked good against North Carolina, 2-point win over Nichols, and last week needing that late touchdown. So you're exactly right. And then you got the Missouri game in November, which is in Columbia, in South Carolina, in Columbia, South Carolina. So this game's huge. This game from a program standpoint, that's why we said it. Big week around the SEC. You look at Georgia, Ole Miss. You look at Tennessee, Florida. You look at the loser stops coaching match, basically, between LSU and Auburn. Whichever coach loses, that probably is no longer employed at their school at the end of the year. Those are huge games for national implications, for coaching implications. This one's big for the improvement of South Carolina's program.
Well, we always appreciate the breakdown on South Carolina football, but I know that you have so much more to offer when it comes to SEC football across the board. I love the sport and can't get enough of it. So we need to tackle you sometime to talk about, the other games across the conference. But, we're both busy guys, but we'll make that happen at some point.
Look forward to it anytime. Glad to be a part of it.